All right, so now we're going to see basically what Napoleon did once he was in charge. Did he preserve the revolution or did he destroy the revolution? Which historians have endlessly debated even while Napoleon was still alive. Well, in our last video, uh, uh, Napoleon came back from the Egyptian campaign basically with two goals. One, to divorce Josephine because he learned that she was having an affair. By the way, all of Europe knew that because Napoleon wrote a letter to his brother back home in France about his heartbreak, and that letter was put on a French ship, and that French ship was attacked by a British naval commander named Lord Horatio Nelson. They captured that letter, and then the British government proceeded to publish that letter of Napoleon's heartbreak and embarrassment. So, yeah, he was a little peeved at Josephine. Second goal was to investigate whether or not the time was right to overthrow the Directory and gain more power for himself. He arrives back in France. First thing is confront Josephine. She begged him not to get a divorce. He said, too bad. Then she brought in the big guns, her stepchildren, who Napoleon adored. They begged him not to divorce their mom, and he relented, which was a good call. Napoleon and Josephine, they'll never be in love from this point out, not in the typical romance way, but there was a kind of respect and affection there that they'll have until Napoleon does eventually divorce Josephine down the road years later. The second goal, to gain more power, that was successful. He leads a coup against the Directory with help from other politicians and members of the military. They overthrow the Directory and create a new government called the Consulate. Now, in theory, power would be divided between three different consuls in theory. But in reality, Napoleon, as first consul, that was his title, first consul, then he had second consul, third consul, three consuls. Uh, uh, as first consul, he was essentially the dictator of France. And then eventually, he put it to a vote to the French people, and they voted him the consul for life. But after an assassination attempt on his life that failed, he decided that was not enough, right? And so he decides that he wants to become Emperor Napoleon the first, right? And he is officially crowned in a papal ceremony. Now, think about how big of a deal that is, that the Pope is involved in crowning the Emperor of France. Just a few years ago, France was trying to de-Christianize itself. Now, at the coronation, something pretty interesting happened. Napoleon actually took the crown from the Pope's hands and placed it upon his own head and did not allow the Pope to place the crown on his head. Now, whether or not that was planned and the Pope knew about it, or did it take the Pope by surprise, it certainly took the crowd by surprise that Napoleon took the crown from the Pope's hand and put it on his own head, almost as a sign saying, I did this, this is mine, right? And in the picture, you can see Josephine kneeling down there. She'll be Empress Josephine. Turns out she picked a pretty good catch. Luckily for her, he did not divorce her yet. That's a few years down the road. Well, he'll eventually divorce Josephine because Josephine never gave him the one thing he always wanted, a child of his own. So eventually he divorces Josephine and marries a younger woman who does give birth to a son. But that's years down the road. Right now is Emperor Napoleon and Empress Josephine. So now that he's in charge, we're going to see what he did. And one of the first things he did was he made peace with the church because the overwhelming majority of France was still Catholic. Despite the efforts to de-Christianize it, most were still Catholic, many devoutly so. So this just made good political sense. Napoleon himself was not Catholic. If anything, he was a deist. He's a little hard to pin down when it comes to religion. He just didn't really care about religion, to be honest with you. He certainly didn't care what your religion was. If it made most of the people of France happy, he's going to make peace with the Catholic Church, right? So he recognized Catholicism as the religion of the majority of the French people, but he did not return church lands. Remember, during the early days of the French Revolution, because of the civil constitution of the clergy, the government began to sell church lands to help repair the financial crisis. He informed the church, yeah, you're not getting those lands back. They were bought and sold fair and square. That made the landowners happy. The church wasn't thrilled about that, but at least they're not being de-Christianized and persecuted in France, so you can take what you can get. But he also made sure that the church knew that even though he is admitting and declaring officially France a Catholic nation, that France will have freedom of religion, that no one will be forced in Catholicism. Some of his top generals were Protestants. His own personal bodyguards were Muslims that he hired back in Egypt that he enjoyed so much, he brought them back to France. He really just did not care what your religion was. All it mattered to him were, were you loyal? Can you do your job? Right? If you can, it didn't matter to him. So this makes most of the people in France happy. This is just good politics, and it's enlightened freedom of religion, right? That's an enlightenment ideal. That was in the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. That's something from the revolution that he preserved. He also finished codifying the laws. Before the French Revolution, there were around 400 different law codes. In France, it was a mess, right? It was fractured, right? You had different laws in different parts of France. It was a chaotic mess. And during the French Revolution, the revolutionary government tried to fix it, but they had other things to deal with, like beheading a bunch of people. It's going to be Napoleon using his power, forcing a codification of the laws, a reformation of the laws to make them one unified whole in France. And Napoleon will go on to say near the end of his life that this was his greatest legacy, because the system of laws he will take with him as he conquers Europe. And his civil code, also called the Napoleonic Code, it becomes the basis for much of the law code in Germany, for instance, and in Spain, and in the Netherlands, and so this law code, right, affects not just France, but a good chunk of Western Europe. The laws that exist in Western Europe today can trace their heritage back, if you will, to the Napoleonic Code, to the Civil Code. Now, this civil code guaranteed equality before the law, for instance. It guaranteed freedom of religion. It guaranteed property rights. Unfortunately, though, it did decrease the power of women. It officially said that husbands were in charge of the household, and it took away many of the rights women gained during the French Revolution. Parts of Napoleon are very forward thinking, are very revolutionary, like the freedom of religion thing, for instance. He also tried to stop anti-Semitism, persecution of the Jewish people within France. Anti-Semitism was widespread and quite popular in parts of Europe. He tried to go, no, not my country. So there are aspects of his nature that are very revolutionary, aspects that as a modern educated person we would admire. There are other aspects like his view of women that, well, we find rather repulsive, actually. Now, the new bureaucracy he created, the government and military that he created, was also very revolutionary of him. It was very enlightened of him. His new bureaucracy was based on merit, talent, skill, ability. He did not care what your background was. If you were noble, right? Good for you. If you were born common, good for you. A great example are his marshals, his top generals. One of his marshals was noble in blood. Another one was an ex-felon slash dance instructor, odd combination. Another was a former baker. Another one used to be a traveling curtain salesman before the revolution started. One of them, or two of them actually, weren't even French. One was Scottish and one was Polish. He didn't care. Can you do your job? That's it. That's all that matters. That is very enlightened of him. That's very revolutionary of him. So we historians debate, did he preserve or destroy the revolution? It kind of depends which historian you ask. Some historians are pro-Napoleon and some are very much anti-Napoleon because he's complicated, right? In the preserve the revolution column, he preserved equality before the law. He promoted religious toleration. He guaranteed the right to own property. He appointed people based on talent. All that is from the revolution. Yet he severely decreased the rights of women. He limited freedom of speech and press. And the longer he was in charge, the more of a despot he became. Despotism. Punishing people arbitrarily for disagreeing with him or not supporting him enough in his eyes. Giving his family members important jobs. Even if they didn't really deserve them, like he made one of his brothers the king of Spain, even though his brother did not want to be the king of Spain, and his brother knew he'd be a horrible king of Spain, and it turns out he was a horrible king of Spain, right? That was not very enlightened of him at all. So Yeah, he is whatever you decide he is. If you want him to be pro-revolution, there's plenty of things to pick from. If you want to say, oh, he destroyed the revolution, there's plenty of things to pick from. To some, Napoleon's the hero. To others, he was the Antichrist. There were actually people who called him the Antichrist while he was alive. One other thing that he did that's super important, though, uh, uh, is he loved war a whole lot. That would go in the not enlightened column. And he was constantly at war. Now, he argued that the wars weren't his fault, that people just wouldn't leave him in France alone. There's a little bit of truth to that. Some of the wars, though, he started. Some of the fights he picked with Britain, for instance. Sometimes Britain picked the fight with him. But that's not very enlightened. It's going to lead to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people throughout Europe, and it's going to be very expensive. See, speaking of expensive, he needed money. So he sold us the Louisiana Purchase. That's kind of a big deal, right? We bought the Louisiana territory from Napoleon because he needed money to fund all of his wars. By buying that, Thomas Jefferson was our president at the time. By Jefferson agreeing to buy that from the French government, from Napoleon, the size of our country doubled overnight. Right? That's a big deal in U.S. history. And we got to add a steel, too. Just a couple of cents an acre. I mean, it was robbery. But Napoleon was desperate for cash, and we took advantage of it. That's kind of the American way, right? Seeking out a good deal. So you can see Napoleon has this huge impact in Europe and in the New World. His civil code inspires the law code of much of Western Europe to this day, and because of selling the Louisiana Purchase, the size of our country doubled overnight.